Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to speak about this new moon in Gemini, the recent Venus Sun star point, specifically through the lens of it manifesting on the north node of Uranus. I'm just going to be devoting this video only to that. There are many layers to unpack, and I'm going to devote the next several videos to kind of going there. Those who are with me during my recent June live stream, I did address this, and I've decided to go slower and just sort of unpack all of these themes with a little more attention to the detail over the next several videos. So let me start by teaching what are the nodes of Uranus. Why am I giving attention? Why am I interested in the north node of Uranus? You can see that the north node of Uranus is over here, and these are all the north and the south nodes of the planets. Every planet has a north and a south node. The moon has a north and south node, and they're an exact polarity. The planetary nodes aren't always an exact polarity. Well, they never are an exact polarity. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they move very slowly, and those nodes are in the same place, same sign for everyone alive currently. The way to understand the south node of a planet is it speaks to the greater conditioning, the greater context relative to that planetary function that conditions that planetary function. The north node, it's its evolutionary development. So what does this mean for Uranus, and why do I care about this right now? Well, to answer the first question, Uranus in part speaks to the long-term memory of the soul. Contained within the soul are all the memories of all experiences that have ever happened. They're not consciously recalled and categorized in a Mercury kind of way, but they're embedded within the field of our collective memory. So Jeff Green borrowed the Jungian term and said this is the individuated unconscious. Every soul has this memory, and it's just there. And collectively, we all have a sort of collective humanity memory. This is where we've all been as a humanity, where we're coming from as a community, as a tribe. The south node of Uranus speaks to that we all have embedded within our individuated unconscious the memory of having been a part of different tribes and groups and communities that lived in nature. These are more indigenous, nature-oriented, or even nomadic sometimes, ways of living. We all have a memory of that collective past. Remember that Uranus speaks to community and groups of people. So we all have the memory of living together in these ways, with greater respect to nature and to natural law and to natural rhythms. Thus, we also have embedded within our collective memory, within each of our individuated unconscious, and these aren't memories that we recall, but they're embedded, right? Where these indigenous tribes and communities have also experienced the trauma of indoctrination and alienation relative to the introduction of religions and belief systems that are seeking to indoctrinate and say, this is the right way, your way of living isn't right. So where we've experienced the trauma of being alienated from nature, disconnected, uprooted from nature, and what is natural in our implicit connected relationship to nature itself. So the trauma of separation of groups and people and ideologies and right and wrong and separation from nature and indoctrination of unnatural belief systems that teaches us to relate to what is natural in distorted ways. So we know this is a part of our collective history as a human species. There are no indigenous communities alive today that don't contain and hold that trauma. It's very real, very alive. The Gemini north node of Uranus speaks to our collective evolution as a community, as a human species, as a human community, right? Also, Uranus is like the greater ecosystem of humanity. Remember that Uranus is always going to be limited by the nature of our intelligence. We're going to perceive a reality in a framework of reality at whatever level we're vibrating. And when we start to think differently and see new things, completely new possibilities open up. So relative to Gemini, this in part speaks to the egalitarian accessibility of all knowledge, all information, anytime, anywhere to all people. And this sort of shatters any kind of dogmatism or religiosity or fundamentalism of that south node in Sagittarius. And also takes us out of looking at truth and reality from a sort of like cosmological belief system orientation, and more from a what is it, right? When all information is available, how can we think critically and see things from a very fresh lens of the beginner's mind, looking at things as they are, not through a belief system. So we all know that this is a big part of what's happening collectively for all of us. The accessibility of information and for knowledge, and how that's unifying people all over the world. Of course, what's happening right now with all of the media and the technologies and the devices and the social networks, like that's just a small moment in history. I really feel that way. It's a very small moment and is just sort of a phase in this greater evolutionary process. And it might seem very real because that's like the ocean we're swimming in right now. So this North Node in Gemini speaks to that evolutionary process. Whenever that North Node is emphasized, these themes are going to be emphasized, right? So new ways of thinking about communication, data, sharing knowledge, all of those things, how we connect with each other through the means through which we communicate. It speaks to an evolution and an acceleration in how we're thinking. Now let's come back to Uranus, and that's why this is so important. Uranus is entering Gemini soon. It's going to be sharing in this air trine with Pluto in Aquarius for like 8 years. That's a very powerful accelerated process. During that time, it's going to be moving towards its North Node. That's a very powerful acceleration and focus on the evolution of that Uranus function. New ways of thinking, new ways of categorizing information and social connection. So let's just take a metaphor for a moment. You're a child in school. You can always say it's like the uniqueness of the child and the creative potential, that's Leo, right? But then being in a group of people, your class, that's Aquarius. You're out at recess and there's that social pressure, right? Like, am I a part of the group? Am I liked? Am I the cool kid? Am I the awkward kid? I don't want to be the awkward kid. And so the Gemini trine to Aquarius comes in, where we learn a sort of social adaptability and mutability. How can I fit in? Right? What are the trends? Like, what's the cool lunchbox to use? What are the words to use, the words not to use? We learn to adopt and kind of evolve our minds and our ways of thinking and gesturing in order to fit in. And if we don't do that, we're afraid that we're going to be alienated. We're going to be on the outside. And thus a big part of what happens in this Gemini social development is we learn a sort of duplicity. How to act and behave and, say all the things that will make us likable so that we can fit in. As we develop socially, there's a sort of like stress and pressure that we have on ourselves to know who to be in order to be liked, in order to fit in. Thus, the energy of authenticity, just being true to yourself, is more of a rarity. It has to be celebrated and really encouraged. We have to know that it's safe to not try to fit in, to be true to yourself. This North Node in Gemini in general will speak to the liberation from duplicity, to communicate and be relatable and to spread your ideas and to be a part of society. You don't have to pretend to be something that you're not. You can just be your authentic self. And what is a way of thinking where you're yourself and you want everyone else to be yourself? Like there's a natural, authentic interest and curiosity in everyone. Who are you? What are you like? What are you into? Not trying to conform, not trying to be something else just so that we can fit in. When that is the basis of our communities, it always allows for a richness and an ecosystem that's so much more vibrant and healthy and contains within it possibilities for experience that other ways wouldn't contain, right? Otherwise, we're just concerned with being liked and fitting in. Let's think about social media in that light. You think about social media networks and there's a lot of attention on, well, to be seen, I need to know how to play the algorithm. I need to know how to, put a picture there so that it gets more feeds, right? Or put something in the comments so it's repeated more often, right? And there's so much stress around how I present myself to be seen. Many people depend on social media for their business, but many people also depend on social media for their self-esteem and their self-value. The corporations that built them, for the most part, and the ones that are most popular, have their self-interest in mind, right? They're encouraging your use of it, your frequent use of it, and it's sort of designed to hook you in. But these networks aren't coming from a place where it's just this truly benevolent orientation to better humanity. There's also like, oh, how can I sell their data? How can I create the situation where I hook them into an addiction so I get more profit out of that as well? This is the world we're swimming in. From like a Marshall McLuhan point of view, the media is the message. Like here we are, we might be posting videos and sharing information, but what's actually communicated more so than all the things that we're sharing is the media itself. The actual framework and structure through which we're sharing all of this knowledge and information in the first place. Because that's the that's the wall, that's the ceiling of the world we're living in. We don't really understand it until we're out of it. It's like we don't really use landlines or roadmaps anymore, so we can objectively look at that and analyze and think about what was it like to live in that world where that's the whole framework of our living. We don't realize the framework that we're living in because we're just so immersed in it. And that's the message. You know, to be successful, you have to learn how to play the game. And that's just accepted. Your data is being sold, but that's okay because this is the part of the game. And right, but that's the message that's being communicated, whether or not we like it. We're as a collective agreeing to it and a part of it. There are always going to be people that are not a part of it, but they're always going to be sort of the outliers, right? The consensus itself is a part of this world. Thus, for anyone to create something new, it always means there needs to be some sort of adequate non-interest in what they might be losing behind in leaving the old, right? This ability to sort of say, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to move from this known where everything is and have a new thought that isn't popular yet. And that might take some time before that thought grows and becomes more integrated in the consensus. There are always going to be new people doing that. And a part of what's happening now, what we're going to be seeing is ways of thinking, ways of relating, ways of communicating, but coming from a higher, more inclusive way of thinking. What is it like to create these devices to nurture free and open exchange of knowledge and information that is more kind? That, you know, technologies that don't deplete entire ecosystems or devastate communities because of the minerals. Social media networks that aren't encouraging addiction, but encourages quality connection and is benefiting the creators in some way without commodifying the users. Right? It's just a matter of thinking. And the tendency of the human mind is, well, we're not going to think of those things because we tend to just accept the current framework as all that is and all that's going to be. But we know it isn't, right? Like, we know there's always something new because we keep on seeing that. Especially in this accelerated time of change, there's all these new ways emerging. Right? We had Tribe.net, we had Friendster, then Facebook, then Instagram, then TikTok, and all these others. Now there's these other paradigms that are a little bit different, also beginning to emerge. Different frameworks, different business structures. Okay, so that's a general context for this Uranus North Node and the great significance and the liberation and the accelerated change in mind with Uranus moving towards that over the next several years. But let's give attention to right now. 1, we know Jupiter is going to be moving over this and going retrograde, so moving over that North Node 3 times. That's going to be very much kind of emphasizing this, making that very evident over the next several months and into next year. That's the first part. But more imminently, we have Mercury, this new moon, this Venus, all moving over this North Node. I'm going to give attention to the significance of this Venus-Sun conjunction happening where it is. So, we might know about this Venus-Sun conjunction. Every 8 years, the Venus-Sun conjunction will come together, right, and create a star point in 5 different points. It's actually every 8-year cycle, they come together 10 times. It's basically 2 sets of 5. They come together 5 times during Venus's direct cycle, and they come together 5 times during Venus's retrograde cycle. And they'll come together in the same point, kind of overlapping, each time just like a little couple degrees regress in that same sign. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. Let's move this 4 years backwards and forwards. And you'll see, let's go backwards, right? Look at Venus and the Sun. You're going to have Venus was joining the sun during its inferior conjunction. That's when it's retrograde, which is when Venus is closest to the Earth, right? And then we have today, 4 years later, it's joining again during the direct. And then 4 years from now, it's going to be happening again during its retrograde cycle. Right? For the past several Venus-Sun conjunctions in Gemini, and they'll repeat themselves basically until they, regress into Taurus. And it's happening in every single sign that Venus is kind of making those petal flowers, those star points. During the past several cycles, Venus-Sun conjunction has been very close to this Uranus North Node. But now we have Uranus actually entering Gemini. So look what happens in 4 years during the next Venus-Sun conjunction in Gemini. Uranus is right there. And because they move together, if you actually go back a couple days, you'll see the Venus would be on the sun just like a little bit earlier than where it is this year. So this current Venus-Sun conjunction is almost like setting in motion or kind of signifying also this greater evolutionary process that's strongly pointing to this Uranian development. It's on the north node of Uranus. The next time it comes there, Uranus will be there too. So there's a highlighted theme here. So let's talk about what Venus-Sun means here and how this connects with all that I've spoken to so far. And I will end the screen share just so I can speak directly about this. We know Venus has everything to do with grace, beauty, embodiment, pleasure in our relational life, but also in our embodiment of this human experience. We want to feel a sense of, grace and embodiment and personal value in our life so it feels livable and personally meaningful to ourselves. The trap of Venus is always a sort of over-commodification, where we become overly addicted to or invested in or familiar with the trap of that which is comfortable and familiar. So there can be a sort of shallowness in Venus, where we like what we like and we do and we want what we want because it makes us feel good, which relates to that survival mechanism within Venus. But there's no depth to our life. It can sort of just be like, yeah, more chocolate, this is sensually gratifying, whatever just makes me feel good, or I don't want to deal with complexity, right? So it can be a sort of shallow inner reality where we're not really connecting with our own value and something more meaningful in our life. And that's why Venus has a strong correlation with stagnation, because it's sort of this energy of hoarding and just like indulging ourselves with whatever is sensually satisfying, but we numb ourselves out in that process. So Venus in Gemini, of course, can speak to the numbing out through social exchange, like overstimulating our minds through too much communication on our devices, too much social media, a sort of over inundation with, well, I want to be liked and pleasing, so I'll be duplicitous and available and social and relatable, but really ungrounded at the same time. A learning with Venus in Gemini is, on the one hand, bringing beauty and grace into our communication, but also infusing our communication and our dialogue and our listening and our consumption of data with, this feels relevant. Like this makes my life more livable. This is a poetic reflection and expression of why I'm here, living here as a soul on this planet at this time. But we need to fundamentally have a relationship with our own feeling body and not just kind of get sucked into the constant mental frenetic activity of Gemini. When Venus joins the sun, two things are happening. One, it is a sort of a glorification and emphasis of that Venusian function, but at the same time, Venus is not seen. Right? Venus is in this darkness phase. And during the direct superior conjunction, Venus basically transitions from being a morning star to an evening star. And the opposite happens during the retrograde, right? It transitions from being an evening star, goes hidden, and then it reemerges as a morning star. So let me share the screen again because I want to point something out to you. When Venus is a morning star, it's up in the 12th house. That's a very mystical house, right? It's there in the sky before the sun rises. And then it goes hidden. And it reemerges in the evening. When it's in the evening, it's in the 7th house. That's the house of relationship, of connection. And so people talk about the evening star as like the romantic star. Makes sense, right? Because 7th house is more relational, more about human connection. There's a process right now where it's moving from that morning period to that evening period. And to me, what this intuitively represents, and I speak of this just connecting directly with just the energies of these placements, there's a going within process that happens now. We actually might be facing a void, a sense of emptiness or disappointment in sort of the Venusian quality of our life, where there's a lack of meaning or value, where we're not feeling the deeper needs or calling for pleasure and connection, intimacy, meaningful experience is empty or is void in some way. And what that's putting attention towards is a greater reflectiveness of what is all of this talking for? What is all of this social media for? What am I using it for? What's its purpose? You know, we can easily just get lost or distracted in scrolling and seeking or sharing because, oh, I look good, or I look good in this picture, right? And that's a superficial Venus and Gemini. It's not entirely honest. Like Venus and Gemini can really know how to gesture, communicate an idea that looks really beautiful, but maybe it's like making me feel good, but it's not authentic. There's no real intimacy, right? What is it for? What am I really doing here? This is giving a lot of attention towards that. And I think where we might find ourselves overly inundated with something that's overly stimulating, it might feel kind of meaningless or empty. So that's a part of what's happening right now. In the context of the larger evolutionary cycle of this Uranus North Node, I think this speaks to there has to be another way. I don't want to just fall into the programming of being in a trance-like state and seeking stimulation and learning how to be liked, learning how to work within the social system that currently exists. I want to know why I'm here. I want to know what's truly meaningful, and that's like, what information do I really want? I was working with someone today. I know she'll be okay with me sharing that, a client, and she was sharing her life story with me. And we were talking about her beginning to write articles and sharing this because it's just so beautiful. And I realized, you know, of all the people that share meaningful content, I don't really feel a draw to follow most people. I don't feel to stimulate my mind with what a lot of people have to share. Not because it's not valuable, but it doesn't feel relevant to where I am needing to be. Most of it can actually feel like a distraction. And I know what it's like to kind of be distracted by something that's interesting. Right? Venus and Gemini, everything can be interesting. Oh, because I'm curious. It's interesting. Oh, that's fun. But it can be a total waste of time. And by the way, this, current, let me just point out the current transits, like this current square to Saturn really does emphasize, like, is this really worth your time? And I'll speak more to the Saturn Neptune because they're both going retrograde. So there's like a deeper internalization of like, what's this world for in the first, like, what's time for? Like, what am I here for? What's it all about? It's a big part of this Neptune Saturn. Like, what's the point? What's really meaningful, truly? Why am I doing this? But I felt when I was hearing her share, I'm like, I would read your story because it touches my heart and feels so relevant to like the intricacies and the challenges and the complexities of the human life and where I'm still growing and really working shit out. And that was cool for me to realize, oh, like, this is the poetry that I want to read. It was exciting when I recently realized Rilke. I never knew about Rilke until recently, and I feel like I found a friend. Like, I want to read Rilke, right? What really speaks to us? And what is it you really want to say? What is that's really wanting to be expressed from the poetry of your own heart? What's really authentic and true and real and meaningful for you? I think these are some of the deeper reflections coming up right now. And the larger evolutionary shift in how we're making information and knowledge available from a more inclusive place. Like, the more we actually want quality content and meaning in our life, truly, the more we're going to become increasingly thoughtful of the institutions and modalities that we're just kind of buying into. We want something that really nurtures and nourishes our longing for connection. That's what Venus speaks to. It's a heart chakra. There's a deep, deep longing for connection in that. So those are some of my basic reflections on this. All in all, I think this month, with all this strong Gemini energy, is both very accelerated and very energizing. A lot of new ideas and thoughts and insights, especially with that new phase, Jupiter, Pluto, as it kind of expands further into the new phase, more objective clarity. But also all of that new Gemini on that North Node of Uranus, we're bringing in the future. we're seeing new pathways when we're willing to kind of let go more of the artificial and connect with something that feels a lot more wholesome and meaningful. I will just say, this month, both Saturn and Neptune are stationing retrograde. Now, you can't tell just by looking at it, but if you look at the chart, and I'll just show you this. I think this is really meaningful to end with this context because it's really an essential part of what's going on right now. Follow till the end of the month and just look at Saturn and Neptune. At the very end of the month, Saturn goes retrograde, and then Neptune in the very beginning of next month. So both of these planets are going inward. When outer planets move retrograde, there's a sort of internalization, something shifting relative to those planetary functions. We're kind of brought more within, and there's like an acceleration process that then happens as we kind of tune more deeply to that planetary function. After this retrograde, Saturn will then go direct and join Neptune, and they'll go back and forth over each other on the cusp of Aries and Pisces, 2025 and 2026. So these Gemini planets are actually strongly bringing in this greater evolutionary process of Saturn, Neptune. And it really speaks to, Saturn is structure, form, roles, time and space. Neptune is meaning. In a really real way, I think we're all faced with this greater change happening. We're drawn to the structures of our life, and there might be this emptiness growing. Things that otherwise had meaning or purpose might not feel meaningful. The roles, the structures that we're playing, our role in relationship, our family, our job, the conditions, things that we do. It's like, why am I doing this? What's this purpose? We have to kind of reconnect with what's of greater meaning and value so that the roles that we're inhabiting in our life don't just become the day-to-day thing that we do. That's where the emptiness and the futility of Saturn, Neptune comes in. We've sort of lost our connection to the divine, to God, to truth, because of just the structure that we've become enslaved to, where form serves itself. And what's happening right now is we're learning to reconnect with our deepest calling, our deepest inspiration, the love inside of us. That's at the essence of this whole life. To renew our devotion to that, so that structure and form serves that. So we're infusing greater meaning in the roles that we're playing because we're letting it serve something greater than just itself. So the retrograde really speaks to a strong focus towards that. And all of these Gemini planets squaring that, again, just brings up like the ways in which we're relating, communicating, sharing knowledge, the media, the platforms, the ways in which we're interacting with each other as a humanity. And also just, how do we communicate with one another? How do we share knowledge? As in our relationships, as a business owner, as a teacher, in the structures that we're responsible for. There's a lot of rethinking right now. I think this calls for a lot of simplification, where we need to simplify the structures and the stress, because if there's too much effort, it can feel like we're overstimulated and we're losing connection with why am I doing this in the first place, right? Something that might otherwise feel beautiful and inspiring, we can just sort of get confused about it and forget the purpose of it. And that Saturn, Neptune will have this strong desire to kind of like retreat from the world, especially if we're overly mentally stimulated. So it's a great time to just slow down and really connect. But I think in many ways, this is a less is more kind of month, and Jupiter further speaks to that, and I will address this more in a future video. I'll end with this thought. Someone once said, I don't know who quoted this, but if you want to know why you're addicted to something, stop doing it for a while, and this was Michael Singer. It's an indirect quote. If you want to understand why you're addicted to something, or if you want to even identify if you are addicted to it, try not doing it for a designated period of time and see what happens. Simplifying and making it as clearer, easier, less complicated is a great thing to do right now. As always, I'm available for one-on-one sessions, relationship readings, and also long-term soul-to-soul companionship sessions. These are a way of working with me long-term to build more of a soul connection and continuity for deepened soul growth, and they're also discounted. I have many classes, series, and self-study courses on my classes and series page. you can learn much about this work, evolutionary astrology taught through the lens of my own ongoing realization. If you enroll in the self-study program, you're eligible to jump in on any of the live training programs, which I begin every year. All right, as always, thank you so much for watching.